The history of Wermuth Asset Management really is an accident to do with bad weather in Oxford. I was trying to write a doctor's thesis having worked on East German unification. As you may remember, East Germany, West Germany were supposed to be united, and there was a Chancellor, Kohl, who wanted to be the first Chancellor of the United Germany. So he made a very simple promise to the citizens of East Germany. My cousin was in East Germany, and he was exchanging an East German mark for a West German mark for roughly 10-1. And the way politics work, Mr. Kohl said, vote for me and I'll exchange your currency 1 for 1. Now imagine a country with 15 million people where you multiply everybody's salary by a factor 10. So that was the topic of my master's thesis, the impact of German unification on the macroeconomy of Germany and Eastern Europe. As a result, I became one of the few people who knew anything about how to count the beans when you're changing from a communist planned economy to a market economy. And when the Russian government opened up and looked for experts, I happened to be one of the people that had a clue how to do accounting. So I'm a bean counter, a mathematician and economist. My father is here, who's an economist. My mother is a mathematician, and thus I qualified as a bean counter. One of the young economists in the Ministry of Finance at the time was Sergei Alexashenko, who became one of my first bosses. He set up an expert group in the Ministry of Finance, which I ended up heading up. How did it all happen? Well, I arrived in the ministry, actually I arrived in Moscow, and for me, when I stand in this hall here, it's a big difference. I don't know if you can imagine a beat-up Lada, that's like a German Trabant, a very old car. When I arrived at Sheremetyevo, it was very dark and grim, and I was driven in a car that smelled of milk and kefir, and it was very, very strange. I was driven into a flat where there's one refrigerator, and I said, here's your food, and there was a brown paper bag with 2 potatoes, and that was it. I put the toothbrush next to my bed, and in the morning there was a cockroach on my toothbrush. And I thought, ooh, this is starting to look good. Having arrived in the expert group, I did some basic mathematics, and it turned out that if only Russia sold its oil and gas at world market prices, it could double its GDP. So that was a big statement. So as you go, when you're just from university, I write a memo, dear Prime Minister, you could double GDP if you just exported oil and gas. To which the ambassador invited me and said, dear Mr. Wermuth, let me tell you some things about protocol. You may now leave the country because it is not your job to write to the Prime Minister. Thank you very much. Back to Oxford. So I was on the way to Oxford, on the way, fired after 3 weeks of my first job. And I received a phone call. The Prime Minister's office would like to see you, please, in Stalin's dacha. I said, now it's getting serious. Stalin wants to see me. And we go to a place called Volinskaya, and there's a large table, lots of experts, and Mr. Gaidar, the Prime Minister, said, who wrote this memo? And I said, I did. He said, how old are you? I said, 23. How long have you been here? 3 weeks. And you think you can double GDP? Yes. But you can't get the oil out of the country. I said, yes, you can. But the capacity is limited, he says. No, it's not. You can add chemical agents. You double the throughput. I said, really? Okay. Do you speak any Russian? And I said, no. He says, you're hired. And I said, why? He says, young man, who speaks Russian? And I said, I don't know. He says, spies. We don't want those. And communists, we also don't want those. So there you go. I became an expert in the Ministry of Finance of Russia, reporting to Sergei Alexashenko, who is still as energetic as you will see as I first met him. When I first met him, I walked into a Ministry of Finance priyomnaya, reception area. The door to his office was about the size of this screen. And inside, I had seen a group of about 6 generals walk in, big Russian generals, okay? And any of these generals, you're going to see a volume of screaming at hundreds of soldiers. But the doors were shaking as Sergei was screaming at the generals, telling them, no money for you. So that's Sergei. You will see him live in a second. So this is how I started. I started as an economist trying to, help Russia do economics right. Our job was to produce a budget revenue forecasting model, which meant macroeconomic forecasting, central bank, and so forth, help. I did this for 4 years, and the most important thing that I would like to leave with foreign investors, and not only foreign investors here today, what I do when I go around the world, is that Russia is not just about the money flushing, corrupt oligarchs buying football clubs. But to my mind, in the 4 years that I worked with the finance ministry of Russia, there were people who really cared to make Russia a free market economy and a democracy. To my mind, these were and are heroes. People like Sergei Alexashenko, I put my hand in the fire. When he was the deputy head of the chairman of the central bank, he took me in his big Mercedes down Rublovka, and I thought this was death. 200 kilometers an hour on the opposite side of the road with a driver in an armored car. 2 weeks later, he was driving his back old Lada again, okay? Here's someone honest and hardworking who did not take money on the way. And for me, the people in the Ministry of Finance, Central Bank were heroes because we had people outside demonstrating, wanting to take down the door of the ministry and throw us out. The communists were on Red Square, the communists were in the streets. They wanted to come back and fight back. At the height of the crisis in October '93, I gave a call to the predecessor of Mr. von Plötz, and I said, I have a sniper in my room. What should I do about it? There was a sniper firing bullets at the White House, and bullets are flying back in my flat. He said, it's a temporary internal shuffle. Do not worry, keep on working. So Russia is about people that want to make this place better. It's not just people who sit there, cash in and cash out. And it's a fantastic place that we very much enjoyed. So moving on in life, I spent 4 years in the Ministry of Finance. The height of the career was Andrei Ilarionov saying, Mr. Wermuth, would you consider becoming a Deputy Minister of Finance? And I said, I'm German. He said, oh, you just have to give up your German citizenship and then you become a Deputy Minister. I said, that's very kind, but at the current rate of borrowing, you will probably default by the summer of 1998. So thank you for the honor, rather quit at this point. So I moved on to help build Deutsche Bank Russia from scratch to a 140-person organization. I was then getting old. I was 27 years old. And I learned something very important about life in the next half year. I did a contract that said, dear Deutsche Bank, pay me a third of the profits I generate for you. And they said, how old are you? 27. What are you going to do? Raise Eurobonds. What are the commissions? 2%. Okay, maybe he can raise a small Eurobond. He'll earn $200,000. We'll pay him $60,000 bonus. As it turned out, a small group of 5 guys raised $8 billion in 6 months. Commissions were $160 million, and my bonus was $37 million. So the chairman of Deutsche Bank, Mr. Breuer, comes to Moscow and says, this is the highest return, risk-free business of Deutsche Bank because we have no exposure. So I was very happy. 6 months of banking, $37 million, to be paid to me. Little thing that didn't work out, they forgot to pay me. So I had to say, well, dear friends, please do pay me. And they said, well, no, sorry, the financial crisis, you can't earn so much money. I said, well, pay me something. I said, no, actually, you should go back to academia, and they forgot to pay me. So then I learned something about real friends in life. When I was flying in private jet as the chairman or member of the board of Deutsche Bank and driving with big armored cars, I had lots of friends. When I was fired from Deutsche Bank, there was not a single friend to be found among lots of the expat community. However, I was very, very happy to find true heroes. Deutsche Bank claimed this man didn't generate the business. This was generated by other people. This young man had nothing to do with it. So I had to go to people like Sergei Alexashenko, who was in the central bank, because Deutsche Bank says, you don't even know this guy. You don't know Mr. Dubinin. You don't know this finance minister. And as it turned out, the head of the central bank at the time, or deputy head Alexashenko, the minister of economics Yassin, the deputy minister of finance Vyugin, Zadornov, the minister of finance at the time, all came out as witnesses to say, this man did the work, and you should pay him. And Deutsche Bank said, oh, excuse me, misunderstanding. And we settled amicably for an undisclosed sum, which we started investing in Russia. So that's the beginning of our first million, which we then invested. But I'm not here to talk about my life too much. I'm about to talk about opportunities in Russia. In Russia, we know basically what the world thinks about Russia. We have a few slides that you can take home. It's a nightmare by anybody's consideration. If you read The Economist last weekend, it says, Mr. Mao says, 34% of Russians would like to shoot everybody who's responsible for their unhappy lives. 22% of Russians would like to leave the country, up from 7% just 3 years ago. If I go to see Shell Pension Fund, they say, thank you, Mr. Wermuth, for returning 35% for me per annum for 10 years, but how can I go to my shareholders? There was a default in 91, restructured in 95, default again in 98. Steal the assets from Yukos, steal the assets from Shell, put people in prison, kill people in prison, shoot people in Abu Dhabi, shoot people in Vienna, poison them in London. Why should I go to Russia? It's a corrupt country. There's no hope. It is a disaster. Okay? And I say, well, that is partially true, but where there's a problem, there's an opportunity. And I'm here to convince you today that the perception of Russia is certainly 10 times worse than reality. That's number one. In fact, as you see, it's quite a normal place. But on the other hand, Russia is at least 10 times worse than it could be. I mean, how can you imagine a country with a city like Moscow with 15 million people without a taxi lane? It's so easy. There's so many things that can be done easily. So we're here because we say, what an opportunity. Russia, again, has a great opportunity. There were two shocks in the history of Russia, which we quickly touch on, and then I pass to this much more eloquent board than myself. We had the 98 default. The 98 default of Russia meant the Russian government finally adopted the fiscal policy, the conservative fiscal policy that we had recommended for a long time and Sergei Alexashenko was screaming at the military about. They were not doing it under Chernomyrdin because the communists were really still in control of the Duma. After the 98 default, finally, a conservative fiscal policy was put in place. With the high oil export tariffs, which were taking away 95% of the revenue beyond $20 a barrel, 95%, the Russian government was able to turn a deficit and debt level, 150% of GDP, to basically zero over the next 10 years. The debt dropped to near zero. The currency reserves became the third largest in the world, steady GDP growth, and Russia today is without doubt one of the best credits if you take the macro fundamentals. Of course, you also have the question of willingness to pay, and that brings us to micro issues. After 2000, Mr. Putin came into control, and he, as you know, crunched down on democracy and freedom of the press, and it was sort of a very sad situation that we're in today, which leads to a suppression of real political competition. The hope is that 2008 will have turned his mind and he's finally moving or will encourage the move to more liberalism. That's my hope. Our skeptical guests may have different opinions. I believe 2008 crisis was also very important for Russia and will bring micro reforms. We had the president of Russia publish on his webpage, "Dear citizens of Russia, we're a backward, corrupt nation. We have legal nihilism. If we want to survive, we've got to change." That's the president of the country in public. Further on, we had a debate where Igor Jürgens and others said, you cannot modernize the country without liberalizing. And one of the most important points that has been put forward from Hans von Plötz is, in fact, Russia has already passed its sovereignty for many key issues to the European Court of Human Rights. In 3 cases already, the Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg has taken decisions that have been implemented in Russia, i.e. the rule of law is something that is very high that very few people recognize. We have efforts to fight corruption with the publication of incomes, the publication of family incomes, and we have first foreign policy successes. Now, of course, the question is this window dressing or for real? We think there's a real opportunity here. We're engaged in this, and we're grateful to the inputs from some of you and many of you. We've been able to help, I think, contribute to the 2008 crisis, how to fight the crisis. We produced a memo, how to change the investment climate, and the President of Russia has invited us to participate in an initiative how to stimulate the civil society of Russia. And there's a hope to get it going finally. So the result is, from a macro point of view, Russia looks fantastic, and no debt compared to Japan, UK, Spain, US. The potential is there. Can we exploit it? It depends partially on us getting active, investing here, and the Russian government creating the environment, but not least the Russian civil society, the entrepreneurs standing up and doing something. We have some YPOers here from the Czech Republic. The YPO, the Young President Organization of Russia, is very active. We have young entrepreneurs in Russia which are very active, and overall we think there's a movement going forward. We're going to cover today, in the course of the day, I'll introduce you to the managers of various of our investment activities. We are very worried, as you will hear from my father, about the outlook for inflation globally and the outlook for equity markets in the world. If you're a long-only investor, I think you'll suffer. We therefore have a deep value investing fund run by Sergei Yezimov. We have a global long-short fund, a quant fund, which makes money when the market goes up and down. And we invest in areas where we believe we are below the radar screen of where political interference occurs. A clean tech fund, which we're very excited about, with the Republic of Tatarstan, a private equity fund, and real estate development fund. But without further ado, the message today is Russia is very problematic. It is a disaster. What an opportunity to make a difference. And with this, I would like to ask first Sergei Alexashenko and next Hans von Plotz to make some remarks. I will move to the general screen. Thank you very much and enjoy the day.